Right. Now, I'm hoping that we can go to Secretary John Kerry, who I think you can see. Secretary Kerry, good afternoon to you. I'm Nick Gowing, and nice to see you. I think you're in your residence. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you hear me, Secretary Kerry?
Hello?
Secretary Kerry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good indeed, I can hear you. Thank you for being patient. We're glad we've got a signal up. Can I ask you, first of all, with COP26 coming up, I heard you at the European Bank 4 days ago talk about the need now for a wartime mentality, that nothing like enough is being done. Can you encapsulate your thinking at this moment directly to all our viewers and attendees at this conference?
Well, indeed I can, and thank you very much for your efforts and for the efforts of our friends in Great Britain for leading the COP26. The fact is that after the summit that President Biden hosted, we had about 55% of global GDP represented by Europe, the UK, Canada, United States, Japan, come together and agree to try to hold on to the 1.5 degrees target, which means you have to do things between 2020 and 2030, or you cannot keep 1.5 degrees and you cannot achieve net zero by 2050. The fact is that 45% obviously therefore still remains outside of that commitment. And some of them are bringing coal-fired power online, even as we speak. There are new plans for new coal plants. So the G7 recently said we will not fund any external coal plants anywhere in the world at the end of from the end of this year. We need everybody to join in that effort. We need everybody to be setting ambitious targets from 2020 to 2030 in order to be able to keep the hope alive that we're going to hold on to the 1.5 degrees. And it's doable, and we're working very hard with those countries. President Biden will be hosting a redux of the summit that we held in April. We'll be doing that at the UN in September, where we will convene the major economies group forum. Most of those 20 countries are represented in that group. And we really need to push harder to achieve our goal. You know, I mean, many politicians around the world, many leaders have talked about how climate crisis is an existential crisis. And for many people today, it is existential. We've lost lives in the last days just to the heat, and we're only, at the beginning of summer. The fact is that we need to come together. Those 20 countries are the imperative. If they will move, the rest of the world will follow and move, because they'll have, the economy globally will follow and move. Now I see a lot more corporations beginning to take note of the reality of this. We have financial disclosure entering into the marketplace, which will have an impact on the allocation of capital and create a new sense of responsibility in boardrooms, fiduciary responsibility. So we're moving. The problem is you have to be honest about the fact we're just not moving fast enough. And so we've got to come together with the same mentality with which we have fought wars. I mean, you've got to spend what you need to spend. You've got to do what you need to do. You have to do it as fast as you can. In World War II, we were turning out one B-24 bomber per hour at the height of manufacturing in the Ford Motor Company plant, Ford. So we have to press some of our ingenuity and creative entrepreneurial capacity to produce more solar panels, to turn out greater efforts with wind turbine technical capacity. We have to push for green hydrogen faster. We have to come together to do storage, whether it's battery or otherwise, faster. Everything we're doing is most of what we're doing on the net side of those who've committed to 1.5 is good. It's just not enough.
Are you facing around the world, Mr. Secretary, denial, an unwillingness to accept the absolute severity of what is now happening and what the science is warning us about?
Well, I hate to say it, but the greatest level of denial is right here in my own country. And we still have people who have not embraced the fact that it's a problem. In most of the rest of the world, people will say it's a problem, but still not move in the ways that we need to move. I'm hopeful that we can and will. And here's the reason why people should not be resisting this. They should be leaping at it, because this represents the greatest transition in our economy since the Industrial Revolution. And it represents huge opportunity. I think many people are beginning to recognize this. I've worked with 6 major banks in the United States: Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, State Street, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and they've all committed publicly to the amount of money over the next 10 years that they intend to invest, not give away, but invest in climate-related projects. And any revenue-producing climate project, whether it's water, transportation, power providing, creation of products like cement and steel and so forth, these all get revenue. They ought to be able to be put out in commercial scale in normal commercial terms, or at least in terms that we should work on in blended finance with the international finance community, with the global financial institutions, with the multilateral development banks. And we've got to change the model of how they're working, because we're really in a race against time. And that's not an exaggeration. I'm not an ideologue on this. I've been involved in this issue since the 1980s, but it is growing more urgent. And we see the feedback loops from Mother Nature coming at us bigger and faster than were predicted by the scientists. So this is a great economic opportunity. Huge wealth is going to be created in a market that is already at 4.5 to 5 billion users, 860 million people who don't even have electricity, and it's going to go up to 9 billion users in the course of the next 30 years. That's a gigantic marketplace for products that people really desperately need to buy. And the sooner we begin to get our corporations to help come together to create the sort of first mover syndrome that begins to bring people to the table, the faster we're going to stand the better chance of meeting this challenge.
Literally just 1 minute, if I may, Secretary Kerry. What about how you portray the positives in all of this? I witnessed the President's 2-day virtual summit back in April. It was invigorating, but you've got to get through to the people on the street, the customers, the clients, those who think that this is somehow someone else's problem. What is the positive message you can give us today?
The positive message is that this is a job-creating, quality of life increasing endeavor. We will have, the particulates that are in the air from coal-fired power plants fall into the ocean, and they combine to increase the acidity of the ocean, change the chemistry of the ocean, and put more heat in the ocean. The fact is that the oceans are the place where 51% of the oxygen we breathe comes from. It is part of the solution to the climate crisis. And I think people will relate to fundamental, basic information if they're given it. What we need is for fossil fuel industry to begin to tell the story of how they're going to become not gas and oil companies, how they're going to become energy companies, and how they are going to move much more rapidly to transition to this new economy, make our air cleaner. After all, greenhouse gases are pollution. There was a time in the 1970s days we cared more about pollution than we seem to care about it now. And we did more about it with a principle called polluter pays. And that was the principle that helped us clean the air and clean our skies and do better than we were doing. Now we're going the other way. The parts per million of particulates, of carbon dioxide and so forth in the air is growing. And that makes people sick. It actually brings, creates, it's cancer inducing. Some of it is carcinogens. Some of it is, compounds prior conditions that people may have, whether it's emphysema or heart problems or other things. We see 8.7 million people die each year just due to the pollution from coal. We know this. And so we need to begin to show people the benefits of cleaner air, greater health, greater security, bigger, stronger economy with new sustainable products. And I would call on the fossil fuel industry to be advertising more about it. They've never had a problem spending money to keep digging oil and fuel, but they ought to be helping to effect this transition. And I think ESG, that is in the boardrooms all across the world now, is going to begin to demand even greater responsibility. We saw what happened with the board membership of ExxonMobil. That is a beginning. The Shell decision in the Netherlands, the court decision in Germany. I think increasingly people are going to take every measure they can at their disposal to try to press for action on what the science is telling us we must act on.
And Mr. Secretary, one final thought. You've made very clear up to $4 trillion a year is needed for the next 3 years, but no government has enough money.
The $4 trillion, what is needed, the UN has done a finance gap report, and they say that for each year for the next 30 years, the transition would cost somewhere in the vicinity of $2.5 to $4 trillion a year. We have not spoken to that. That is a number that comes from the UN finance gap. But what we know is no country in the world comes close to having the ability to put those multiple trillions out as a government program. This can only be resolved by having the private sector embrace this and move wholeheartedly. And what we need to do is work in partnership with the private sector with things like the production tax credit, the investment tax credit, by providing greater incentive, by coming together and doing R&D and helping to translate that R&D into the new products, the new systems. I mean, whoever discovers battery storage that lasts for a week or 2 weeks, longer than now the 4 hours or 4 hours plus, which is at commercial scale, by the way, and is helping nations and states to be able to actually produce 85 to 90% of their energy needs from renewables. So it is doable, and particularly if we search for that holy grail of storage or carbon capture or next generation non-threatening, small modular reactors. I mean, there are plenty of options on the table. We have loads of solutions at hand. We need to bring them to scale. And that's where the private sector can step in.
Mr. Secretary, we're most grateful to you for sparing time. Secretary John Kerry, Special Representative for President Biden on climate change. We wish you well, and thank you very much for the clarity of what you've just said and the message to the Climate Innovation Forum. We're most grateful to you. Thank you for joining us.
Very much. My pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. So Secretary John Kerry underscoring that this needs a wartime mentality, the enormity of what is coming, quoting the United Nations saying at least $4 trillion a year is needed. No country has enough money. That's the scale and the urgency. We're delighted that he was able to spare time, as you can see from his private residence, to talk to us here on the Climate Innovation Forum. We're going to take a short break. Don't go away. We've got one final event from HSBC, so stay there, and we'll be back in 2 minutes only, the last event of this forum.